each of you, I'd like to bid a good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy School of Government. My name is Ronald David. I'm a lecturer in public policy here at the Kennedy School, and I'm also a physician. And it is my pleasure to serve as your host and moderator for the evening. It's a special honor for me to be able to introduce our speaker for the evening, the Natural Law Party's candidate for President of the United States, Dr. John Haglin. Dr. Haglin, among other things, is an internationally known and renowned physicist. He was awarded his doctorate in physics here at Harvard University in 1981. He's done research in Europe at the largest subatomic physics research laboratory, the CERN, and at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center in California. Dr. Haglin has authored over 60 articles in his field, and they have been published in the world's leading physics journals. In fact, I think I remember reading somewhere that there are a few people who even consider him among a small group of his caliber who are candidates, or ought to be candidates, for the Nobel Prize. He is currently head of physics at the Maharishi International University in Fairfield, Iowa. And I first met this extraordinary man at a conference back in June here at the Charles Hotel. And it was a conference about, oddly enough, chronic disease, the management of chronic disease. And at that time, he spoke about the significance of our understanding of quantum field theory in terms of its application to chronic disease. And he spoke with such lucid and awe-inspiring descriptions that I was immediately caught up in his orbit, if you will. He then went on to talk quite, I thought, incidentally, about the application of the same quantum field theory to life in general. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, this man ought to be candidate for President of the United States. And I subsequently discovered that indeed he was. He is, as I mentioned, the Natural Law Party's candidate for President of the United States. And that party was established just 7 months ago. As I understand it, it's the most rapidly growing political party in the state. It has already achieved national party status. Dr. Haglin is on the ballot in 32 states. And last Friday, I don't know how many of you had seen it, there was an infomercial that was neatly sandwiched between the Perot infomercial and the special on the Cuban Missile Crisis. As I understand it, 30,000 people responded to that infomercial, and that was something like 3 times as many as they had expected. That infomercial, by the way, will be broadcast again at the following times: on CNBC Thursday, tonight at 10:30, on CBS Saturday, October 31st at 8 p.m., on ABC on Sunday, November 1st at 7:30 p.m., and CNBC again on Monday, November 2nd at 10:30 p.m. And as I understand it, again, this will be a little different in that you'll get to know a little bit of the personal side of this extraordinary person. Now, before yielding the floor to our honored guest, I'd like to make just a few announcements and share 2 thoughts with you. Immediately following the forum, there'll be a reception at the Charles Hotel in the Rogers and Stratton room that begins at 8 o'clock, and there will be a press conference tomorrow morning at 10:30 in the Agassi room, also at the Charles Hotel. Those of you who are interested in finding out more about the party, there is a press table right outside the room, and so after the conference, if you'd sign up, the party would be more than pleased to share with you what information they have. 2 thoughts I'd like to share. This coming Tuesday will be for me the 7th opportunity in my lifetime to vote for a presidential candidate. Now, that right and responsibility I have taken quite seriously through my life as an African American. And sadly, through most of my voting experience, I found myself voting for the lesser of two evils. On one occasion, I even had planned to write in Dick Gregory. I was so displeased with the candidates that were available to me. This Tuesday will be my first opportunity to vote for a candidate as opposed to voting against the worst of two evils. Secondly, as you go to the polls on Tuesday and you make your choice between the traditional party candidates and the candidate who has profited thus far from traditional party politics and way of being in the world, and the choice between those parties and the natural law parties, I'd ask you to consider the wisdom of yet another world-renowned physicist, Dr. Einstein, Dr. Albert Einstein, who said, "No problem can be solved by the same consciousness that created it." And as you hear Dr. Haglin, I'd ask you to put that wisdom in context. Dr. John Haglin.
Certainly a great pleasure for me to be back here in Cambridge. I've been back once or twice visiting the physics department, but I never imagined I would be here. When I was asked 5 months ago if I would be the presidential nominee for the Natural Law Party, I thought about it for a couple of days with my wife and accepted. We didn't have a lot of time to think about it with the election 5 months away. But I agreed because I believe in what the party stands for. We believe there should be a more reliable, scientific foundation to government, that government should be based on what works, not what is politically expedient. And that idea is catching on. There are good programs, good solutions that have been field tested and scientifically shown to provide practical solutions to the problems we face as a nation. Problems of rising crime and spiraling health costs, a weak economy and unemployment, pollution, declining education. Solutions to these and other problems exist, but have been overlooked by government so far or ignored for purely political reasons. So this party was founded to collect together from across the country the best ideas and field-tested solutions that work. The best ideas of the Republicans, of the Democrats, of Ross Perot, and many new ideas that have never had a voice in politics, and to bring these solutions to bear immediately in government. This seems to be the year of independent politics. That's because, I think, of the deep-seated frustration that most voters feel for politics as usual and the desire for something new. A dynamics of discontent that brought Ross Perot from nowhere, really, in the polls to the forefront of the polls some months ago, in a matter of weeks. That same dynamics is alive today. Most voters have not yet decided, most eligible voters, for whom to vote. And many who have decided have done so on the logic of a lesser of evils. People need to be exposed to the fact that there are solutions. We've heard a lot about problems in the main debates from the other candidates, but we haven't heard a lot about our solutions. In our experience going back and forth across the country these past few months, remember, the party is 5 months old, and the first few months of the party were spent in research. Research as to what the various problems are in our country, and it doesn't take much deep research, and research as to what the solutions to those problems are. So only for the past couple of months have we been campaigning, and we have had 125 candidates step forth to run for U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives, and we're on the ballot in 32 states. So it's a very rapidly growing phenomenon, and we are the first political party, it turns out, in the nation's history to have achieved both National Party Committee status and federal matching funds, both by unanimous vote of the FEC. The reason for this rapid rate of growth is because, again, we represent an idea whose time has come. There's nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come. In this case, the idea is a very simple one. Government should be based on what works, not what is politically expedient. I'll explain the name of our party, the Natural Law Party. Natural law is a concept that is both ancient and modern. It really stems back to Greek times and was revised slightly in Roman times. And again, at the founding of this nation by our founding fathers who believed in natural law, some intelligence of nature or laws of nature that govern the universe with incredible efficiency and economy and without problems. They felt that the extent to which the citizens of our country were in tune with natural law, were educated about natural law, then they would govern their own lives in accord with natural law and behave towards one another naturally in a way that upheld and respected each other's rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We know a lot more about natural law today than our founding fathers did 200 years ago. We have very precise knowledge of the laws of nature governing our universe, the laws of physics, the laws upholding human health, the laws governing our environment, the laws of economics. And the Natural Law Party was founded really for three reasons. Number one, to bring the most up-to-date and profound scientific knowledge of natural law and scientifically proven programs based on that knowledge to bear in government. You could say to bring natural law into alliance with natural law, bring natural law into alliance with national law through programs that bring the most effective use of the laws of nature into the field of government. And to restore the vision of our founding fathers by raising life of our citizens to be more in harmony with natural law through behavior that takes natural advantage of the laws of nature to promote better health, to promote more life-supporting behavior, a cleaner environment, and so forth. And I'll talk about those specific programs in a moment. So that's the first goal of this party, is to bring natural law into alliance with national law. Second goal is to provide a more reliable basis to government, to raise government out of the murky realm of conjecture and speculation and broken promises as to what might work, and bring it into the light of science, base government on programs that do work, that have worked, that have been field tested and shown by extensive scientific research to provide the desired result. And finally, the third reason this party was founded is to break the bipartisan gridlock that has consistently stood in the way of proven solutions to our nation's problems. To put an end to bipartisan fighting and the dynamics of conflict in Washington that has prevented good legislation from making its way through our political process. And 86% of all voters feel, correctly in my opinion, that the existing main parties, the Republican and Democratic parties, will never introduce the democratic reform necessary to put an end to party politics, to put an end to gridlock, and make government accountable to the people again. And I'll talk about that as well. To be more concrete about what it means to take maximum advantage of the laws of nature to promote better health, better behavior, and to allow government to be simple and efficient, to provide cost-effective solutions to the nation's problems, let me talk quickly about health, or agriculture, or crime, or economy, and you'll get a feeling for what this means. We are facing a very serious health crisis, in my opinion. We spend $800 billion per year on health as a nation. That is rising rapidly and expected to double in the next 6 years. And despite that vast expenditure, 35 million Americans don't have access to health coverage. They don't qualify for Medicaid, perhaps because they make too much, but they can't afford the high cost of private medical insurance, which for private individuals, not members of big companies, those costs are skyrocketing. More than half of this vast expenditure is preventable through simple preventive measures. prevention-oriented health education, prevention-oriented natural medicines, which have been shown through extensive scientific research to promote better health and to cut health costs by 50 to 70%. In fact, the savings realized in small businesses who have opted for prevention as a means of lowering health costs have saved a factor of 3 to 4. A dollar spent on prevention for them has been $3 to $4 saved. In other words, I think we could say that the health crisis in this country is not due so much to delivery. It's not due so much to the legal problems, the tort laws, but that is part of the problem, and that needs to be addressed. But the reason for the health crisis in this country is poor health. And we can promote much better health through simple preventive measures. We have a great deal of knowledge today about the immune system, about natural medicines that strengthen the immune system against disease. We know a lot about diet, about exercise, about effective stress management, about domestic and occupational safety, about the effects of cigarette and excess alcohol consumption. And what has been found, again and again, is that through a simple prevention-oriented health education course, 3 days or 3 evenings, this provides the knowledge to empower people to take better care of their own health, enjoy better health, and significantly lower health costs. This is an application of the most up-to-date knowledge of natural law, knowledge of preventive medicine, and knowledge of health, which we can bring into the realm of national law, incorporate this knowledge into our national government, and promote much better health for our nation. Specifically, practically, in Medicaid and in Medicare, the government, who has control over those programs, could implement a prevention-oriented health course immediately, and also incorporate natural medicines and alternative medical systems where those alternative systems have proven effective. What we have found on the basis of a simple 3-evening course is that within about a year, an individual taking this course, gaining basic knowledge about exercise, nutrition, stress management, etc., enjoy better health and reduce health costs by about $1,000 per year. And after 2 years, that savings increases to about $2,000. It takes some time for prevention to have its maximum effect. That means within Medicaid and Medicare, if we introduce such a program, we can save $108 billion of our nation's precious resources. And I think the taxpayers have a right to insist that people enrolling in those tax-subsidized programs gain this knowledge, which will allow them to take better charge of their own health, enjoy better health, and cut expenditures by $108 billion, not in the first year, but by the end of the second and third year. On the basis of that $108 billion savings, that figure comes from research on the use of this very program already, we could open up eligibility to Medicaid to the 35 million Americans who currently don't qualify, providing high-quality health care for all at a net cost savings to the nation. To provide health care for all at a cost savings to the nation obviously requires new knowledge, in this case, knowledge of preventive medicine. Not new as far as the medical community is concerned, but for some reason new to our government. I believe that government should transcend the level of purely economic approach to administration and get involved with knowledge again. Because as long as you're just dealing with economics and allocation of resources, you're playing a no-sum game. And I don't believe we'll ever feel that there's enough money in our treasury to provide health care for all, to provide jobs for all, certainly, unless you have new knowledge, new programs that promote better services at a significant cost savings. What we'd also do, I don't want to linger on this too long because there are many points I'd like to share with you, and I'd like to save most of our time for discussion. What we would do to influence the private sector, since the government has limited control over the private sector, and I believe that's a good thing, is we would simply open up eligibility to this revitalized Medicaid program to middle and upper income families. They would pay for that service, but they would enjoy a very competitive rate due to the savings realized through prevention. Now, what would happen as a result of opening up eligibility to that program for everyone is that the private insurance companies, the private health providers, would be motivated to quickly incorporate prevention into their own programs in order to remain cost competitive with the government. And I believe since the private sector is bound to do this better and more efficiently than the government, that within a year, the private sector will become the principal provider of high-quality health care emphasizing prevention. So there are certain ways the government can exert its leverage and in that way inject new knowledge and new programs into the private sector. And if we do that, we will enjoy lower health costs across the country and much better health as a nation. Again, we could call this alliance with natural law because we're bringing the most up-to-date knowledge of natural law into the realm of man-made law, taking advantage of what is now known about the laws of nature, in this case the laws of health, and providing the knowledge and the programs to allow people to govern their own lives in closer harmony with natural law. Because, as our founding fathers believed, and I think this example shows, if people conduct their lives in a way that is more healthy, more natural, in tune with natural law, they'll enjoy better health and fewer problems of other kinds, as we'll talk about shortly. Agriculture is a key area of mine, of interest. I live in Iowa these days, in a very rural community. And at the present time, 78% of Iowa farmers, and that's approximately true for all farmers in our country, would like to shift immediately to sustainable practices. Practices that don't erode the nation's soil base, which has already dropped from an average of 18 inches 100 years ago to less than 8 inches today, and is predicted to all but disappear within a generation. They would like to switch to low-input sustainable agriculture that does not use as much or any poisonous pesticides or chemical fertilizers, but promotes better yields. But they complain that the U.S. Department of Agriculture does not provide the necessary know-how or support through its extension services to make this transition. This is an example of where government, again, is lagging the interests and needs of the people by not providing the most up-to-date knowledge of, in this case, sustainable agriculture, to produce a sustainable and renewable industry that will survive a generation, in fact, will survive permanently if we can achieve renewable agriculture, one which is in harmony with natural law and much better for the health of our nation. This concerns me, especially given that the U.S. Department of Agriculture has grown to employ 120,000 people now to oversee the activity of only 500,000 farmers. And the purpose of the USDA was originally to provide the farmers with the know-how, the most up-to-date knowledge and programs to allow them to achieve their agricultural goals. As a matter of fact, the budget of the U.S. Department of Agriculture now exceeds the net income of all of the farmers in the country combined. And it's an example of a government gone top-heavy, and one which is not doing its job, in this case, which is to provide the knowledge to allow agriculture to fulfill what agriculture is supposed to fulfill, the production of healthy foods for the nation without leaving poisonous residues in those foods or our water supply, and obviously agriculture needs to be sustainable. Crime. Another key area, I think a growing crisis. We already, in our country, have the highest percentage of our citizens in jail of any country in the world by far, and rising. Rehabilitation is a failure in this country. People who work in the rehabilitation programs don't use that word anymore because they know whatever goes on in there is not rehabilitation. 85% of all crime in this country is committed by repeat offenders, people who have left the prisons and make their way back into the prisons. So rehabilitation is not working. The other candidates have advocated in response to the growing prison population in this country, which is really due to ineffective rehabilitation and some other reasons we could talk about too. They've advocated a get-tough policy on crime. Double the police force, triple the police force, build new prisons, increase the percentage of Americans in jail from the current 3% of all men between 18 and 40 to perhaps 5% or 10% or more. Perhaps they're not aware of the research that shows that longer prison sentences increase the likelihood that people leaving the prisons will commit further crime. In other words, what's going on in there is not rehabilitation. So the Natural Law Party stands for effective prison rehabilitation programs that work to firstly cut stress in those highly stressful environments and to restore balance in the physiology and psychology so that people leaving the prisons don't return to prisons. The most effective such program so far in our maximum security prisons has been Transcendental Meditation. It's been used in maximum security prisons in California, Vermont, Maine, and Massachusetts, and in other countries, and shown to result in a reduction in the rate of return to prison by 50 to 90%. The research done on this program, the best research, was done here at Harvard in a 5-year longitudinal research study. And as a result of that published research, other countries have adopted this program nationally. 3 years ago in Senegal, for example, in Africa, they taught every prison inmate and every prison guard this very simple program to dissolve stress, to restore balance in the physiology and psychology, to bring life back more in harmony with natural law and national law, so that once released from prisons, the people don't return to prisons. It took a few weeks to teach 11,000 inmates. It's a very simple practice, scientific practice, not a philosophical practice. But within a year, recidivism dropped from 90%, which is a little higher than even in this country, to less than 8%. The prisons went from a situation of severe overcrowding and almost daily riots to one in which a third of the prisons closed, and many others were practically idle. Now, Harvard sent a delegation in 1984 to Washington to explain to the head of rehabilitation programs in Washington for the country about the unique effectiveness of this simple approach in the prisons here and in other states. After 5 minutes, this delegation was interrupted by that official who said, "Say no more. I'm well aware of the unique effectiveness of this program in our prisons. But it would not be politic for me to speak about this program in this election year." That was 1984. Since that time, the population in our prisons has more than doubled. Millions of crimes have been committed, hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost, because this one individual in Washington failed to speak out on a program he knew worked due to fear of political criticism, a type of fear that has been really created in Washington due to this bipartisan politics. Well, the Natural Law Party believes that fear and leadership are contrary principles, and that when a government is elected to office, charged with the responsibility to govern the nation, given the complete financial resources of our country, they have the responsibility to bring to the American public programs that work. And that is the basic philosophy of this party, that government should be based on programs that work, and there are programs today that have been extensively researched and field tested and shown to provide practical solutions to the problems we face as a nation. I'll mention briefly economy. It's a huge subject. Foreign policy is another huge subject, and maybe we'll get into those during discussion. But it's a very sobering experience for me and probably 100 million other Americans to watch the debates and to see the main candidates, Clinton and Bush, stand up and promise to the American people that if they can fulfill, if you take their promise literally, they can cut the deficit by 50% after 5 years. That means between now and 5 years, we'll see another $1.5 to $2 trillion added to our debt, and still rising rapidly as it was rising 2 years ago. And it was quite disconcerting that despite, obviously, the best counseling and expertise available to President Bush and Governor Clinton, to formulate their platform, and despite obviously putting the most optimistic face forward to the American people during the debates, no one had a ghost of an idea how to prevent bankruptcy for our country. The Natural Law Party hopes to achieve a savings to the national economy of $1.2 trillion per year. Not in the first year or the second year, but by the third and fourth years in office. $400 billion savings in the area of health alone, if all of the research on preventive medicine that has been done so far, and it has been extensive, is valid research. $80 billion in crime costs, assuming just a reduction in our recidivism rate by 45%, even though that is only half of the reduction that has actually been experienced through the programs we're recommending. We've tried to be conservative. We've gone for easily identifiable savings, and we come up with this sort of figure based on the most up-to-date knowledge and programs. At the federal government level, we hope to save as much as $700 billion per year, again, without doing a lot of fancy analysis, which we could do to augment those numbers, but just in terms of easily identifiable savings through energy conservation, crime prevention, preventive medicine, and so forth. $700 billion, if my arithmetic serves me, is adequate to eliminate the $400 billion deficit and still cut taxes and still promote better services for the country in terms of lower crime, better health care, etc. Obviously, to make such a claim requires new knowledge. You can't achieve this on the basis of economics alone, which has been the principal focus of our government so far, but through new knowledge and new programs that put our knowledge of natural law, the laws of nature, the laws of health and the environment and economics to work. It doesn't make sense in America, the most creative country in the world, the sole remaining superpower in the world, to have its government based on anything other than the most up-to-date knowledge, as opposed to out-of-date knowledge or second-class knowledge or maybe no knowledge at all. No profound knowledge, as many would claim. Government should be based on the most up-to-date knowledge and scientifically proven programs that can put our knowledge of natural law to work, also raise life of our citizens to be more in harmony with natural law so that there's balance in the physiology, strength in the immune system, natural resistance to disease, less tendency to commit crime, a lot of which is born of deep-seated stress. And we are living in an extremely stressful time. And that accumulation of stress causes imbalance in the physiology and psychology, which contributes to crime and ill health. In fact, stress management alone, in extensive research on effective stress management programs, has shown to give an 87% drop in heart disease-related costs. A very significant figure because heart disease is the nation's #1 killer, claims the lives of 50% of those who die each year, and major reductions in all 17 categories of disease through effective stress management alone. So we can restore balance in the physiology through simple knowledge and simple programs that the government has not really brought to the attention of the American people. One more topic, I think, before I summarize and hopefully continue this in the form of a discussion and not a monologue. And that is this idea of raising government out of the realm of speculation and broken promises as to what might work and bring it more into the light of science, that is, just use programs that do work. Apparently, it's not the habit of our legislators, our elected representatives, to read the literature. They're not doctors, they're not scientists, maybe they're not professionals of any type, except professional politicians. And it hasn't been their habit, really, to research the most up-to-date programs that work. That's my only complaint, really, that government hasn't done its homework. There are programs right now that the American people heard little about or nothing about during the debates that could solve our nations in a very humane, cost-effective, and timely way. Bush has advocated lower taxes. I'm also advocating lower taxes, but our approach is different, and I'll explain that difference in a moment. He speculates that cutting taxes will stimulate the economy, expand the tax base, and help us balance our budget. A reasonable logic, but a speculation. In fact, one that really hasn't worked very well, not in the last 4 years. We can balance the budget, not on the basis of that type of speculation, but on the basis of programs that are known to have the potential to save hundreds of billions of dollars of our nation's precious resources immediately. On the basis of that, we can cut taxes deeply and responsibly. Responsibly to me means without adding to the budget deficit and without cutting essential services. If you can really do that, cut taxes and balance the budget, you can propel this economy into such a growth phase that we'll see an end to unemployment and the declining standard of living very quickly and for the future. The government wastes $140 to $180 billion per year through inefficiency, mismanagement, and fraud. That alone could take a big bite out of our deficit. In fact, there have been 3 major studies, including the Grace Commission study, that have advocated many recommendations. The Grace Commission put forth 2,475 recommendations to trim absolutely unnecessary fat from the government, programs that have had no effect, and purely wasteful practices. Of those 2,475 recommendations, 12 have been enacted by Congress. It is much easier for our Congress to add new programs, much more popular for our Congress with their voters back home to add new programs than to cut programs that have not worked. This is another area where the light of science means something, should mean something in our government. There should be simple criteria for determining what programs are having an effect, what social programs, what job training programs, what programs in the inner city schools, and what programs are not. And programs that are having no effect should not be funded. That is a fairly obvious concept probably to most people in this room, but is one that has not dawned on our government so far. And this is part of what we mean by bringing the light of science into politics. We need democratic reform. Part of the problem is with the system. Ross Perot has made this point. I think Ross Perot is quite accurate in his appraisal of the situation. We need to break the bipartisan gridlock that stands in the way of effective leadership. I've spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill for the last 5 months since I've entered the political arena, feeling like quite a veteran by now. I've spoke with Congressman Jim Leach, a very good Republican congressman. He's been in for 8 terms. He doesn't accept money from PACs or special interests. He's got a good record of service to his country and of integrity. He told me something very interesting. He said he could let me find out myself over the next few years, or he could just tell me. He said, I'll spare you the difficulty and I'll just tell you. There's a war in Washington. It is a war between the Republicans and the Democrats. It is a war in which neither side will take prisoners. The main focus of those 2 parties, according to him and others, is to basically drag down, to tear down the other party. If this is really the case, to even a fair extent, what room is there in such a government and in such a process to introduce, to research, to implement new solutions for our country? We need to break bipartisan gridlock. We need to open up the political process, because only a third party or independent candidate will make the type of democratic reform that'll restore accountability of our government to its people. George Washington, in his farewell address to the nation, specifically warned against political parties. He called them factions. He said they would divide the country. They would monopolize the political process. They would limit the people's choices, which certainly seems to be true this year, and they would stand between the people and their government. He also said they would inevitably entrench themselves as elitists, servers of special interests, unresponsive to the needs of the people. Likewise, Thomas Jefferson said that if he could only go to heaven in a political party, he would rather not go to heaven at all. But despite their specific warnings, 200 years later, we find ourselves faced with exactly that situation where the vast majority of our voters feel that government is no longer accountable to them, when the vast majority of Americans feel that the Republican or Democratic parties will never solve the major problems facing our nation, and where approximately 70% of voters therefore say they would support the formation of a new, third, independent political party. That being the case, that being the majority desire of the citizens of our country, you might ask, where is this major third political party? I can answer that question now. It turns out there are major obstacles that have been placed in the path, intentionally, of third parties and independent candidates. Obstacles of access to the ballot, obstacles of finances to conduct their campaigns, and obstacles to participation in the debates and to media coverage. For example, I turned in 250,000 signatures to gain access to the ballot in California. It took thousands of dedicated volunteers months, but those signatures were handed in a bit late, about 2 weeks late, with respect to the ballot access deadline for third-party candidates, and we couldn't avoid that. This party was only an idea at the end of April, and really only became affiliated in all 50 states by July. So by the 15th of August, we turned in 250,000 signatures, but not soon enough, and we're not on the ballot there. If I were a Republican or a Democratic candidate, I wouldn't have to turn in any signatures, and I wouldn't even have to submit my name until October. Certainly, these early ballot access deadlines are discriminatory. In fact, there are many inequities in our democratic system at a time where discrimination is just not tolerated anywhere else in our society. We challenge the constitutionality of that early ballot access deadline at the Supreme Court level. The Supreme Court said they would hear the case in December. That is the first time in our nation's judicial history that a case concerning ballot access has not been heard in a timely way. And it scares me a bit to think that party politics may have made its way into our judicial system, even at the Supreme Court level. And we were luckier in Nevada. We were also late there. But the court system of Nevada agreed that the ballot access deadlines were unconstitutional and unfairly discriminated against third parties, so we're on the ballot there and in 32 other states. But that's one inequity. Second inequity is, you may have noticed in your tax forms this year, that there's a little box to check whether you want $1.50 of your tax money to go to the Republican campaign or the Democratic campaign. There's no box to check for independents or third-party candidates. Access to tax dollars to conduct their campaigns or conventions. That's discriminatory because there's nothing in our Constitution about two parties. In fact, as I said, the founders of our country were frightened about this two-party system and the degree to which it may entrench itself. So that makes it very difficult for a third party to obtain the finances to get their message, to make their platform known. Also, this party has refused to accept contributions from PACs and special interest groups, which is another financial handicap, but I believe that government should be a grassroots phenomenon of the people, by the people, and for the people. And we will stick to that principle, and that sticking to our principles is paying off. And I'll explain how it's paying off in a moment. But finally, I just wanted to say, the last thing to do with the debates is a bit of a concern to all third-party candidates, of course. 4 years ago, the control over the televised debates was wrested from the League of Women Voters, which was a fair and nonpartisan organization, and put into the hands of the newly formed Commission on Presidential Debates, which is not a nonpartisan commission, but a bipartisan commission co-chaired by the chairman of the Republican and Democratic parties, specifically formed, as far as anyone can tell, to keep new ideas and new candidates out of the debate process. There are no objective criteria that I or any other candidate could ever fulfill. There are no objective criteria at all that would guarantee inclusion in those debates. It is up to the subjective whim of the Republican and Democratic parties who participates in those debates. And that is illegal because the Commission on Presidential Debates is a nonprofit organization and therefore of necessity nonpartisan. And nonpartisan is not bipartisan. If there were objective criteria, at least, that anyone could fulfill, maybe ballot access in 50 states or enough states to win, maybe federal matching funds or national party committee status, anything like that, or all of the above, then at least the criteria would be fair. One victory for 1996 is that I presented this case last week in Washington to the Federal Election Commission, and they agreed that there must be some objective criteria or the constitutionality and legal status of the Commission on Presidential Debates would not be justified. So I think in 1996 we'll have more fair access to the debates, and that's a small victory for democracy. I'm saying this because the importance of the debates Thank you. The importance of the debates to me is that I believe this 4-year political process that we go through has two reasons, has two purposes. One, of course, to elect a president and our elected representatives for the Congress. But another purpose, I think equally important, is that it presents a popular forum for the discussion of new ideas that could be of potential value to our country. If third-party candidates are muffled through a process that excludes participation and excludes access to the press, that vital role of the democratic process will not be fulfilled, and the American public will not hear of new ideas and new programs. Chief Justice Warren recently said that it would be dangerous for all ideas to channel themselves through the main two parties, because he looks back at American history and he notes that many times, perhaps even most of the time, major new ideas that have become policy in our country, that have contributed vitally to the quality of life in our nation, have come from third parties and dissident groups. If the main political parties entrench themselves to the extent that they exert an effective stranglehold on the press and on the political process, the American public will not be educated into new programs and new ideas that work for the country, and will be stuck with a spiraling national debt, rising crime for which the other candidates offered no solutions, spiraling health costs for which they provided no solutions, and other problems that have become an immense burden to our nation. Not to dwell on the negative any longer, I would like to say that despite these obstacles, I am very pleased and proud of all the individuals who across our country have become aware of the Natural Law Party and our solutions-oriented approach, and have gained us ballot access in 32 states, have given us, through their contributions, eligibility for federal matching funds and national party committee status. That is really unprecedented in our nation's political history. It has never been achieved by any other party. Republicans and Democrats were granted those rights. They didn't earn those rights. And no other political party has achieved those dual accomplishments. It, to me, represents that we're an idea whose time has come. And just like 3 weeks before the Berlin Wall fell, the president of East Germany predicted that that wall would stand for at least 100 years. You cannot hold back an idea whose time has come. To summarize, the main points of this opening statement, I will just remind you that the Natural Law Party was founded by concerned citizens, concerned scientists, concerned doctors, concerned economists, concerned teachers, concerned citizens of all kinds who are in touch with solutions that work that have been overlooked by our government so far. The purpose of this program is to bring to bear in our government the most up-to-date, scientifically proven solutions to our nation's problems. And by so doing, to bring national law into alliance with natural law. That just means the application of the most up-to-date knowledge of natural law brings solutions based on that knowledge to bear in government. And to bring the life of our citizens more in harmony with natural law through programs of preventive medicine that will allow people to think and act and behave a little more naturally and thereby enjoy a more robust state of health. Programs to dissolve stress in our prisons and elsewhere, in our inner cities as well. Programs that help to restore balance in the physiology and psychology, expand comprehension, and promote naturally more life-supporting thinking and action. While I'm talking about stress, I want to mention family values in Los Angeles as I close. Family values has gotten a lot of play in this campaign. I think every candidate and every American citizen is for a stronger family unit, a more loving, nurturing, healthy family environment. We haven't heard much about how to achieve that. Domestic violence, divorce, these are symptoms of rising stress. The Natural Law Party, among all of its many, many other programs, have programs that cut stress. Not just individual stress, interestingly enough, but social stress, collective stress. And I want to end by mentioning a recent study which is going on in Oakland, one of 160 such studies, but this is the newest and perhaps most comprehensive. The National Institutes of Health is funding a program, recently renewed funding for $101.4 million, to teach Transcendental Meditation in the inner city to African American citizens. African American males have a 3 times greater risk of heart disease due to high blood pressure and 7 years lower life expectancy. So it seemed like a natural approach, since in 160 previous studies, stress management has been shown to cut heart-related disease by 80 to 90%. But what this study found, and other studies had previously found, is as you reduce the individual physiological symptoms of stress, such as high blood pressure, if enough people participate in the program, maybe 1% or so in the case of Oakland, you also begin to experience measurable drop in crime rate, violence, drug abuse, and other symptoms of social stress. About 16% drop in crime. I don't think it's the people learning TM necessarily who are committing 16% of the crime. I think it's that we obviously live in a society. We affect one another. There are field effects of consciousness, and I'd be happy to talk about those as a physicist if we had much more time. But it's possible, really, to get a handle on social stress. And if you don't, and if it continues to rise, if there's tension, if there's frustration, if people's needs aren't being fulfilled by government, and that's often the case, and stress grows unchecked, you will inevitably see an eruption of violence and crime, such as we saw in LA. And it's easy to prevent that type of outbreak. It's like water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. Even if you throw on a few drops of cool water, it's enough to stop the boiling. Even a few people participating in our programs have cut stress in the 160 cities in this country where these studies have been performed, enough to result in measurable and significant improvements in crime and other indications of social stress. Okay, so we have programs that can restore balance, that can help to bring life back in harmony with natural law and national law, that can promote better health, better educational outcomes. And without better educational outcomes, I believe it is naive to expect that we can solve the problems we face as a nation. We have these programs. Now what do we hope to achieve? Why would anyone in their right mind undertake such a political campaign? I claim I am in my right mind. There are 2 types of victory. One is victory in the polls on November 3rd, and we're going for that type of victory. It is said that it would take a miracle to win this election, and it would. But remember, most voters have not yet decided for whom to vote. And our experience has been so far that wherever we've had a chance to present our message and distribute our platform, the response has been very, very overwhelmingly positive. We did a show Friday night on NBC. We've had a relative amount of free national coverage, but rather than sit around and wait for more, we decided we'd try to put on our own. So we did an infomercial. It was not prime time in the sense that it was Friday night. The viewer audience was 5.5 million. The rating was actually very high. But the response, 30,000 calls within 20 minutes, was the highest of any political type of program or broadcast that the services that did this show knew about and they believe existed. That means, again, that we're striking a chord with the American people. We represent an idea whose time has come. If we can just get exposure, and it's a big if, then we can win the election. My experience has been that it's been a downhill battle, and that wherever we've gone to speak, to student rallies, Perot supporters, inner city churches, Native Americans, doesn't matter to whom we speak, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. That's made it possible for me physically to do this, go to 3 states per day, give 14 to 20 shows per day, and feel energized by the process. It's a downhill battle, but it's a long hill. And I don't... How far we make it down that hill by November 3rd remains to be seen, and although it would take a miracle to win this election, I think it would take a miracle not to win the next election. Because remember, the other political parties have lost their base of support in that 83% or so, 2 months ago anyway, in a poll felt that they could never solve the problems of the nation. 70% say they would support, therefore, a third political party. I think in 1996, the Republican and Democratic parties will be considered fringe parties, and if we're feeling benevolent, we'll allow them to participate in our televised debates. But there's another type of victory, one of which we're ensured, one that we've already begun to enjoy, and that is to successfully inject into the mainstream of politics new ideas and new solutions that work. If the American public is simply exposed to these solutions, they will insist that their own candidates, Bush, Clinton, Perot, embrace these solutions or else risk losing their support. So far, through our campaign efforts these past couple of months, Bill Clinton has been the most nimble in absorbing points of our platform and speaking about them publicly. In the last of the debates, he introduced 10 new ideas. In fact, the only 10 ideas of real content, detailed, specific ideas, came directly from the Natural Law Party platform. We gave him our platform. We gave it to Bush. We gave it to Clinton. We gave it to Perot. We said, use it. Absorb as much of these ideas as you possibly can within your own program, because you may be in a better position than we are come November 4th to solve the nation's problems. The purpose of this party is not to win, necessarily, although we'd like to do so. It's not to become career politicians, for sure. It's to bring solutions to the nation's problems, and through our efforts, through our campaigns, these solutions will be adopted. We're going to be reaching our peak momentum on November 3rd, and we're not going away. Our volunteer force is among the best organized and dedicated of any party in the world, I think of any party in this country. And we're going to continue in our efforts to educate the American people, and through the American people, bring to Washington solutions to our nation's problems. So that's a little longer than I promised, but it's a brief overview of the Natural Law Party, what it stands for, what it hopes to achieve. I'd be delighted to go in much greater detail into our programs, into the application of natural law to national law, into our strategies. At this point, I'd be open to any questions or comments that any of you would like to contribute to this discussion. Thank you very much.
May I ask that if you have questions, that you come down to either of the 2 mics on the extreme sides of the room.
I'm a student at the Kennedy School, and I have a question regarding what is natural law, because I felt you mention it very often, and I think it's an interesting idea, but you didn't explain what it is. Is it mere science, or is it maybe more than science? By science, I mean the things that we can measure with physics, chemistry, and so on. You mentioned that you are from Transcendental Meditation, which is a spiritual movement. I don't know much about it, but I would like to hear more about it. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Natural law is, of course, an ancient and modern concept. It dates back for thousands of years, and there was a feeling about it at that time, that there was some intelligence of nature. There must be some laws governing this complex universe. There seems to be orderliness expressed in the natural order of things around us. And the sense of our founding fathers was also that such an intelligence existed, an organizing power, and they felt that individuals, if they were exposed to those laws of nature, and they had some idea of what they were. Sir Isaac Newton had coined a few specific examples of quantitative laws of physics governing the universe. If people were educated about the laws governing our physical universe, governing our social system, etc., then people would be at least able to take natural advantage of those laws in their own lives, act in a way that brought greater success and fewer problems to their society and to their environment. As a physicist, by natural law, I'm talking, of course, about the most up-to-date scientific understanding of natural law. The concept hasn't fundamentally changed. The detail has changed enormously, with detailed knowledge of the laws of nature governing not just classical physics, but quantum physics, the atomic, nuclear, and subnuclear levels, electroweak unification, grand unification, superunification. Very comprehensive and profound knowledge of natural law exists in the physical sciences, in the biological sciences, and health sciences. Economics is an emerging science, but principles of economics certainly exist. Environmental science is an emerging science, but principles of the environment and ecology certainly exist. That's what I mean by natural law. It is the intelligence of nature. It is the laws of nature that govern this complex universe without problems. The purpose of this party is to bring the most advanced knowledge of natural law and technologies and programs based on that knowledge to bear in government. So it's a scientific definition. I'm very glad you asked that question, because during the Thomas hearings there was a reference to a religious definition of natural law that was introduced by Thomas Aquinas, I believe, and he certainly had a right to do that. It's probably true that traditions like the Christian tradition that have been around for thousands of years, that have been some kind of a guidepost for behavior and for social interaction, must have some relation, some value of natural law. But that's not the interpretation I would give. I would give, and the Natural Law Party would give, a scientific definition. We mean the net sum of what is understood today scientifically and can be proven about natural law and programs based on that knowledge of natural law. Transcendental Meditation, you mentioned. I have taken leave of absence from my position as director of the doctoral program in physics at Maharishi International University in Iowa. MIU is actually a very traditional place. It's a very traditional university accredited to the doctoral level by the NCACS, with a rather strong orientation towards the sciences. What is unique about the university is that there is lab time scheduled, 20 minutes or so, for students to do research in consciousness, to study consciousness, to practice technologies for the development of consciousness, to create more orderliness in the electrical activity of the brain, to promote greater alertness, intelligence, and creativity. I wouldn't call that a spiritual practice. The Transcendental Meditation program has always been promoted as a scientific practice, but it may be, for someone who considers spirituality as holistic development, total development of mind, body, and behavior, then it could be considered a spiritual practice. It's certainly not the way it's promoted in the 527 studies that have been published on TM in our medical journals and sociological journals and psychological journals in 214 different universities in 27 countries. None of those have been on the religious or spiritual implications of TM, if it has any. They've been on the secular value of the practice at promoting health, strengthening the immune system against disease, eliminating stress, restoring balance in the physiology and natural homeostatic mechanisms in the body, etc. So I went to MIU from Stanford, which was my previous research and teaching post, to participate in an experiment where we would take the best of traditional scientific knowledge of natural law and add to that simple but proven programs to develop creativity and intelligence. It's been a very successful experiment. I predict on the basis of the outcomes of MIU, there will be many more universities at least offering such programs as electives. One thing we've experienced in our university, which I believe is unique, is that IQ, or intelligence, grows longitudinally throughout university education by 9 to 16 points. 9 to 16 points out of an average of 100 or 120 points may not sound revolutionary, but it is revolutionary when you consider that no other educational program ever used in a university setting has been shown to develop IQ after the age of 13. And the number of graduates from MIU going on to graduate schools and professional schools is higher, I believe, than any university in the country, despite the fact that people who enroll there are not selected for intelligence, really. It's a very open admissions policy. So it's a very successful experiment, and we have advocated in our platform, which you have, the use of TM, especially in the prisons, because it's been very effective there, and as an aspect of stress management, which is an important aspect of preventive medicine. But this is not the TM party. We've worked very hard, everyone, to pull together a platform that really combines the best of all programs, from sustainable agriculture to energy conservation to renewable energies to foreign policy and defense spending and economics and education, programs that will solve a comprehensive range of our nation's problems. A tiny, tiny fraction, a few percent of the people who support the Natural Law Party know anything about Transcendental Meditation. They've heard about it, sometimes for the first time. They say, sounds good, what else do you have? And I think that's a good attitude. I don't want to confuse the Natural Law Party with something that is promoting one solution over another. The philosophy of this party is to promote anything that works and is free of negative side effects. It would not be true, it may be politically expedient for us to drop TM. So many people don't know much about it or may have confused it for something else. But that wouldn't be true to the principles of this party to promote solutions that work. We would be guilty of the same thing that the Washington official was guilty of in 1984 if we dropped this one aspect of our plank for purely political reasons. And that reminds me of one comment I like to make when it comes to voting. If we don't vote our conscience, vote for the individuals or parties that we feel have the best solutions to the nation's problems, but compromise those ideals and vote for a lesser of evils, to vote against somebody because we don't want to waste our vote, then what right do we have to expect our elected representatives in Washington to do any better, to compromise their own ideals and not vote their conscience when it comes to matters of concern for our country? So I think it's very important that people vote their conscience, and that's the best way of sending our own personal signal to Washington of the type of programs we would like to see implemented in our government. Sorry, that's a long answer to a short question.
Hi, I'm Jane Gilbert. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. I'm very encouraged to hear your description of the platform. Some of the concerns that it raised for me were that many of these programs, although have been proven on a small scale, they're very much cutting edge, it sounds like, the ones that you're describing, and it would involve, to implement them would involve a massive restructuring of health, education, economy, and therefore loss of jobs in many areas, potentially many areas where people aren't trained or risen to this level of consciousness that is part of natural law. What's your strategy for being able to handle that kind of that period of change and the problems that may come out in the short term in terms of
Right, okay.
jobs lost.
Okay, the two wings of that question, I think. The first has to do with the programs we promote, whether they're scientifically verified or not. We wouldn't promote programs in the government for application, for use, that have not been replicated with extensive scientific research. If something looks promising, maybe there are a few studies that show that this or that change in diet may affect heart disease favorably, we'd promote further research on that type of program, but in terms of implementation, we would only promote programs that have been extensively shown to work. And there are many such programs. There's a lot of research that has been done on sustainable agriculture already. Extensive research and replications that show that it doesn't erode the soil, doesn't leave poisonous residues in the water supply. The toxicity and death among farmers is much less. So that's a well-established principle. In terms of small programs versus big programs, in this country it's true that Transcendental Meditation has only been used in about 25 prisons. But there are countries, especially Senegal, who've done it nationally, and that's as big a scale really as you can get. What about these programs and how difficult they are to implement, we've thought that through carefully, and you'll see that the platform is laid out in a very practical way. Preventive medicine, what do? You don't dismantle the existing allopathic approach. You don't dismantle Medicaid or Medicare. You simply begin to add to those programs availability of natural medicines, for example, which have a strengthening effect against disease. You add a 3-evening course on prevention. That would cost about $100, it's true, and that money would have to come from somewhere. But it would save about $1,000 in the first year and up to $2,000 by year 2. So it's not a massive restructuring. What we'll find as health gets better is that healthcare utilization in the Medicaid and Medicare programs will decline. And then you'll find that some of those people who are professionally involved with those inefficient programs will have to move elsewhere, into the private sector, maybe even incorporate within their practice prevention, as many medical doctors are beginning to. So there's plenty of time for the economy to naturally shift and turn in a way that it always does anyway in a free market economy. And to prop up jobs, of course, that are obsolete, no longer of value to the country, whether those are defense jobs or health jobs, is, in the long term, a drag on a free market economy. Much better to put these people to work in areas and producing things that are of genuine value to the country. But your point is a very deep one. I mean, for example, in defense cuts, which we also propose over 5 years, a $94 billion reduction in our defense budget, which is comparable to Clinton's proposals, much more than Bush's. You are going to displace people from the defense industry. And of course, I can sit here and I can say, and it is true, that in the long run, that's better for the economy. Why produce Seawolf submarines that will never be used when these people could be producing better health technologies, educational technologies, cars, or whatever? But there is the short-term concern. How do you get from here to there? I think that what the government can do to make the transitions and inevitable evolution that will occur in our free market economy as painless as possible is to put the economy into a growth phase. If you can do that, of course, all candidates would like to do that, but if you can do that, then you know there are more and better jobs opening up at any moment than there are old jobs being rendered obsolete. And that's the way to make the transition from here to there as painless as possible. How do you put the economy into a growth phase? Again, by cutting taxes deeply and responsibly, without adding to the budget deficit, without cutting essential services. On this side of the room?
Hi, my name is Kendall Mead, and last year my mom came home and announced that she was running for Congress under the Natural Law Party, and we thought she was really crazy. But
my mother did too a week ago.
But it's all starting to make a little more sense. But my one question was, and don't you think if you lengthen the school year and increase the amount of subjects for the normal high school student, that'll sort of cause stress?
It might. Let me say 2 things, though. One is, our educational programs now are not really succeeding to prepare our students for the workforce, for college. As a university physics professor, I'm very alarmed at the fact that our students don't come prepared to do a major in physics. They don't have the calculus. So we're not preparing students for an academic career. We're not necessarily preparing students for highly skilled jobs. We have a 25% dropout rate from our high schools. That's compared to 2% in Japan. In order to be competitive, we must have more effective education. And I think, in addition to just lengthening the school year a bit, and perhaps adding to the number of required courses to be sure people do have the math and language skills that they need, I would like to introduce other programs that can help cut stress in education. And there are many, many good programs that have a good effect and have been used in inner city environments and colleges and schools that can promote better educational outcomes. It turns out that improving the nutritional quality of school lunches, as delicious as they may already be, can give rise to a 16% improvement in academic performance, particularly in the inner cities, which shows that malnutrition is a real factor, robbing students of their motivation, their alertness, their confidence. There are many good programs in the platform. You'll see quite a few that'll produce better quality educational outcomes without more spending and hopefully without more stress. Yes.
Yes, my name is Howard Weiss. I first read about you and your party in a U.S. News and World Report article that was published
Brilliant article, wasn't it?
in September. Anyway, that article sort of gave the impression that the Natural Law Party is the political arm of the Maharishi.
It did. Yeah, it did give that impression.
I'd like to know what the connection is between your party and the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and were the people who found these doctors and scientists who founded the party all or mostly disciples of the Maharishi? And
Okay, you can stay there, but I'll start with your questions. Firstly, I think the 2 million people in this country who've learned TM, mostly under the recommendation of a doctor, or many cases under the recommendation of a doctor, would be quite surprised to hear they were disciples of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, many of whom have never heard the man or seen the man. I drive a Ford, and I would be surprised if somebody called me a disciple of Henry Ford. I do take advantage of a very useful technology that he has brought forth, the automobile, but that doesn't make me a disciple of Henry Ford. The Natural Law Party will adopt any useful technologies, innovations that have an extensive basis of support in scientific research. We have absolutely no connection to the organizations teaching Transcendental Meditation, financial, organizational, or otherwise. We have not received an endorsement of the organizations that teach TM. We haven't sought such an endorsement. The Natural Law Party is what it is. It's a party that promotes solutions. Some of the people who originally founded this party were familiar with TM, sometimes some of them from direct experience. Some of them were probably frustrated that this one program, as well as many others, has really never been used in our prisons and other places where it's been useful. Others, farmers in Iowa, Nancy Tomes, for example, I don't think she's probably familiar with Transcendental Meditation, but she's deeply familiar with sustainable agricultural practices that are working on her farm, that have been shown to work in the Leopold Institute, have been shown to work in the Practical Farmers of Iowa Institute, and have been ignored by government so far due to the influence of the special interests, in this case, the agrochemical lobby in Washington, which is really responsible for the reason that if you are an Iowa farmer and you want to borrow money to bring new lands under cultivation, you have to sign to chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides, erosive techniques, monocropping, everything that's the absolute worst for the environment you have to commit to in order to gain government support. And that's something that she was frustrated about. So there are all kinds of people, and there were a fair number of them who were familiar with TM, but that has changed. Now we have a board of some 72 national advisors, very prominent people in public policy pertaining to agriculture, defense, foreign policy, education, etc. People who are successful in their own lives, who have advised governments before, who are in touch with solutions that work. And the mission of this party, and we've succeeded quite well, is to pull together into a single platform the best ideas of all political parties in an all-out assault on the problems we face as a nation. And we're willing to give this platform to anyone who's willing to use it. That really is the entire mission and purpose of this party, and that's to solve the nation's problems.
I have one final question. Could you say something about where the party is getting its funding?
The party is funded entirely from small contributions from private individuals across the country. We don't receive any contributions or accept them from special interest groups, from PACs, corporations. It is purely a grassroots party, and it will remain, as long as I'm a member of it, a grassroots party. It is 7:30, and I'm told it's time for all good boys and girls to go to bed. I believe that we're supposed to formally end at this time.
Take maybe 2 more questions.
You've been standing waiting patiently.
Okay.
All right.
My name's Catherine Kamsey. I'm an undergraduate at Harvard. I'm co-chair of the Environmental Action Committee, and I guess I have about 1 million questions, but I'm only going to ask one.
All right.
Obviously, I was wondering what your environmental standpoint is, not only on an internal level, but on an external level,
Right.
I guess, in the context of UNSED.
We have taken a very strong environmental stand, as you will be able to read, I'm sure, from our platform. I've talked a little bit about sustainable agriculture. I believe we need to, in effect, an immediate switch to sustainable practices, a switch that would happen by itself if the government simply didn't throw obstacles in the way to that transition. We are very much for the development of renewable energies and energy conservation technologies, technologies that could reduce our use of fossil fuels in half immediately, eliminate dependence on foreign oil, save $46 billion per year in fuel costs, and provide a more environmentally sound basis to our national economy. I'm for the development of renewables. Wind, for example, the latest wind turbines in California generate electricity at 5 cents a kilowatt hour, which is more than cost competitive with fossil fuels. I'd like to remove some of the incentives to use fossil fuels that are currently in place so that the free market dynamics will allow the transition to renewables take place. I'm one of a growing number of nuclear physicists skeptical about nuclear energy. Why? Because of, firstly, the long-term radioactive wastes that remain toxic for 1 million years and have to be safeguarded. So far, we don't have a way of disposing of these materials, and I would put a moratorium on the construction of new plants until we do. And the bigger problem with nuclear, as I see it, is where it's going. We have about 25 years left of low-cost, high-grade nuclear fuel. After that time, nuclear industry will have to turn to what are called breeder reactors and advanced converters that don't consume fuel, but produce as inevitable byproducts weapons-grade fissionable materials. If the nuclear industry takes that route, which is inevitable, nuclear non-proliferation, nuclear containment will become impossible. So for those reasons, I don't see a future in nuclear energy unless some new nuclear breakthrough takes place. In terms of the ancient growth forests, for example, and the spotted owl, I'm more concerned about the lumber industry than I am specifically about the spotted owl, but I think it would be insane for the lumber industry to cut the remaining ancient growth forests because those are slightly more profitable to clear cut than to harvest forests renewably. 3 years from now, if they cut those forests, they'll find themselves in the exact position they are today with no more forests to cut. To cut those forests, I think, would be to destroy our sole remaining laboratory of what it takes to sustain a forest ecosystem. These native growth forests have sustained themselves over thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. Our own replanted forests are perhaps 2 generations, 3 generations, 4 generations old, and the evidence shows that the 3rd and 4th generation forests aren't healthy. Why? Nobody knows. And we may never find out if we cut down our ancient growth forests. Obviously, we shouldn't be cutting down those forests and exporting unprocessed logs to floating offshore lumber companies as well. And we could go on and on. There are very important things that need to be done. They involve international cooperation concerning the ozone layer, greenhouse gases, deforestation, etc. The United States should take the lead in that process of switching to environmentally sound practices that are economically sound as well. We've heard a lot of propaganda in this election year that jobs and economy are contrary principles. They're not. And we just need to lead the way in the emerging energy and environmental technologies to make a both environmentally and economically more sound basis to our national economy. I think in light of time, I'll just take one question over here.
Yes, Doctor. My name is Steve Metrick from the Kennedy School. My question is, what direction do you see the Natural Law Party heading, like on both the state and the local level? Do you see it growing in those levels also?
All levels. I think next time in the election, in this election, as I've mentioned, we have 125 candidates, mainly for federal office. We would have many more candidates if the party had been around. And I think in 2 years, we will have 465 candidates for Congress at the federal level. We'll have many candidates for state and local offices. We'll just be reaching our peak momentum by November 3rd, and the party is definitely here to stay. Unlike November 4th, what you'll see in the various Republican and Democratic offices, you'll see them close down. Volunteers will go home. They'll have achieved whatever they can achieve, which is to gain office. That's not our purpose. I think if we can gain office, and we're expected to win some seats in this election at the federal level, I should come back to that in a minute. It's a very important point. But that's not the main purpose of this party. The purpose of this party is to bring solutions to the country, to educate the American people and our government about solutions that work. And that's not going to go away on November 3rd. We're keeping our main offices open. We'll continue to support our main staff, and 99% of our staff are volunteer staff. And we'll continue to grow. And this platform that you see is certainly an imperfect document. We've done the best we can do in the last few months. We would like to print 91 million of these, send one to each and every home across our country, so that everyone knows that solutions exist. But we're not going to be able to print those overnight. That we can print them as contributions are made available. That means the document will continue to evolve. Each and every printing, we're absorbing new ideas. Some people read the platform, they say, you've left out this. Other people read the platform and say, that's not so practical, take it out. And it's an evolving document, it's an improving document. And by the next election, we believe it'll be the document which forms the basis of all other platforms. I said to somebody on television the night after the second debate, where Clinton had come out with all of our ideas, I said, if you want to know what you're going to hear about in the final debate, if you want a sneak preview, take a look at our platform. And it's a wonderful thing. The ideas are being absorbed, and the purpose of the party is being fulfilled. So the party's here to stay. It's the fastest growing political party in the country by far. 5.5 or 6 million people have heard of us, basically, by now, through this television show and other smaller shows. Between now and November 3rd, another 30 million, at least, will hear about our solutions. We have a show this evening. We have a show tomorrow evening. We've got prime time on CBS on Saturday at 8, Sunday at 7:30 on ABC, and whatever we can get on Monday, whatever we can afford on Monday, we'll get that too. So it's a very bright future for the Natural Law Party, and I think, as a result, a brighter future for our country. Thank you very much, and again, thank all of you.
Thank you all for taking the time to join us. I was trying desperately not to do the Bush vision thing and look at my watch. I don't know how John did it. We have gone over, but if you'd like to get more information about the party, there is, again, information set up outside, and at 8 o'clock we'll be over at the Charles Hotel. In which room, Carla? The something Stratton room over at the Charles Hotel. Thank you.
Your endorsement, that was wonderful.
My pleasure. And they made it easier even as you spoke.
Yes. Yeah, you want to do that here? Over the Charles Hotel. I can do either. Tell you what, let's pull a chair over right now.